Welcome back to another episode of the Max Turn Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch. And today we are going to do kind of a primer on just the general operating of free agency. Going to give a little memoriam to CapFriendly.com. Also, Cap Geek probably deserves a memoriam as well. And just kind of a little bit of a here's what you need to know as things are being thrown out. Ideas like who can sign 8-year contracts, when does that ability expire, can everyone do that, how does a sign and trade, how does acquiring a player's negotiating rights, can teams and agents be talking, stuff along those lines. So we're just going to try and give a little bit of a glimpse into what the behind the scenes looks like right now and how things are supposed to go according to the CBA, then maybe give a little insight into how they kind of go in reality and where things maybe there's some things that are done with a wink wink nudge nudge type agreement before they're allowed to do it. So stuff like that. That's kind of where we're going to go with this episode. So we appreciate you listening. Max Turn Podcast is available on pretty much every single major podcast platform. Our content is at AFP Analytics on X. Contract projections we do will also, as things that we talk about in this episode become relevant, we'll tweet out stuff along that. We're kind of right now our account is very much focused on team building, roster construction, player projections, how this business side of the sport works. That's kind of the focus right now. So if you like that, at AFP Analytics on X. If you're looking for our contract projections, pin tweet right at the top. So I think we'll start with kind of the devastating hockey news. Might be exaggerating a little bit, but for us, this is a tough blow. So, CapFriendly.com was recently acquired by the Washington Capitals, seemingly, at least from the public standpoint, out of nowhere, behind the scenes. It seemed like people knew that this was going to be occurring as teams' contracts were being kind of canceled and all that stuff. So let's start off with some thoughts on CapFriendly, how the impact, what's available moving forward. Then we'll kind of go from there. And hey, before we get into CapFriendly, I kind of slip of the tongue mentioned Cap Geek, but they were the original. Matthew West was the West or Weast. I don't know exactly how he pronounced his last name. He unfortunately had a terminal illness, passed away very young. But he had built the OG, the GOAT website, and it was what CapFriendly kind of is at this point, 10 plus years ahead of its time. And the fact that he had kept that public for as long as he did is just a tremendous testament. So if you're kind of a newer hockey fan, you might not know Cap Geek, but if you've been a hockey fan, salary cap fan for a while, CapGeek.com was just awesome, and it took a while for anyone to kind of be on that level. So I think we'll make sure we give the shout out to the OG there. But thoughts on CapFriendly.com kind of being purchased by the Capitals?
Yeah, so the initial reaction for that is, well, I don't even really know what to think. I guess that's my initial reaction, because in a way I sort of understand the team side of it. I understand the people behind CapFriendly, what they're thinking. From a fan's perspective, I guess for a lack of a better term, it sucks. That site was very informative, but the different tools on there kind of really let the fan, I guess, be the armchair GM, which was one of the tools. I think it just kind of enabled more high-level conversations amongst fans and really kind of drove excitement throughout the year. So even when games weren't happening, there was still a pretty large hockey community very invested and interested in everything. And in theory, without that, it makes it a lot harder for all those conversations to happen. There are alternatives. There's Puckpedia, which has kind of done some recent revamping of the way their site looks. It's a little fresher, more modern. They're continuing to make updates, especially now there's a lot more eyes on them. So there's part of me that is sad about CapFriendly being gone, excited about what Puckpedia is doing. Yeah, that's I guess kind of the initial reaction is it's a little bittersweet, I guess.
Yeah, so I think Puckpedia is very good website. We use CapFriendly and Puckpedia a lot in our office when we're doing tax returns for different hockey players to kind of gauge where their contracts are at. Puckpedia, the agent leaderboard, who each player is represented, is a tremendous feature and maybe something underutilized, underappreciated by the general public. In our office, we love it because we know who we're kind of working with. But Puckpedia, I think where it looks like they're going, it looks like it's not going to be cat friendly, but I think they have. I don't know if they already had the foresight or if maybe they got a hint of something was up and started to revamp, but they've been releasing some really cool things. Their draft pick trade calculator retention thing, that's really cool. That was built out by someone who I forget his name off the top of my head, but I play with the Arizona Coyotes in their analytics department.
Matt Perry. So I think some of his work looks really cool. I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff to be on Puckpedia. I think the question is, the NHL is kind of a league of foulers. Is the Capitals buying CapFriendly going to open up some floodgates that had been a little bit closed for a little while? So there had been a stretch of time where a lot of the analytic sites, people associated with those sites were getting hired, the sites were getting bought up. That had kind of closed. It had been, not that public facing analysts weren't being hired, but they weren't maybe the most prominent people, and now suddenly the most prominent salary cap site is bought up. Are other teams going to follow suit is kind of my question. Yeah, so you had brought that up when that news eventually, or when the news first came out, and it's kind of just an it depends type of situation, and part of that is some teams being more proactive and already having their own database, essentially, their own system internally. Other teams not having it. So Washington Capitals buy CapFriendly. In theory, they're buying all the information. They're buying some of the people behind CapFriendly. That could put a strain a little bit on some teams that weren't as built up with their own internal system. So they could look at a Puckpedia and say, well, maybe we can buy them. There's some other prominent, we'll call them just public hockey, public analytic names that the hockey community knows who have thrown out there, maybe I could make a site like this, and who knows what they would be thinking. Maybe initially it's just, I want to try and replace CapFriendly, but it could eventually turn into well, okay, I just built this product and X team is now contacting me to buy it and maybe hire me, or just a straight purchase of the site. So it's kind of, it depends. It's up in the air, but I think people seeing that, wait a minute, there's value to these sites for teams, kind of, at least there's an initial excitement for a lot of people of kind of thinking, maybe I can work towards that as well.
So I think one of the most interesting things is the Capital. So I think there's questions about why the Capitals needed or wanted to purchase CapFriendly. And their explanation is they want the infrastructure that CapFriendly's developed. A very intuitive way to be able to basically do everything related to salary cap, integrate stats, integrate scouting. Like, they could probably integrate some of their internal analytic metrics into this. So why? It's really because CapFriendly had built out a tremendous infrastructure of a site that the Capitals want to basically add their own stuff to and use in-house. I think there is a question of why the NHL or did the Capitals do this because the NHL doesn't provide this data? The NHL obviously is providing teams this data. The NHL Players Association is providing agents this data. It's just how robust and how usable and how user-friendly is what they're receiving. And the Capitals saw the opportunity with CapFriendly as the most user-friendly tool, basically the best infrastructure that they could buy. Basically, the logic is, well, if we're going to hire a bunch of people to build this for us and take however many months to a year, why don't we just build the best, or why don't we just buy the best that we're like if we're going to hire people to build CapFriendly, why don't we just build it or buy it ourselves?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because you kind of look at the overall costs of both options when you could just already have it by buying it. And there's also, I think, in the past week since it's been announced, there's been a lot of talk of, in general, most teams have something. But in general, when teams would rely on CapFriendly, it really seemed to be because of the ease of it. It was just very easy, very user-friendly, like you mentioned. So one perk, I suppose, of buying CapFriendly is you remove that ease for other teams. And I think every once in a while you can look on X or just somewhere publicly and see some very drastic opinions. There aren't going to be teams that have no contract information anymore, that all of a sudden they've got nothing. It's not that drastic. It just maybe the way they went about different discussions and how they would use CapFriendly. Now they kind of have to go back to the drawing board a little bit. And it was mentioned that there were a few teams that had contracts with CapFriendly to use their site and really be tied into it through an API. And that's a little more serious, depending on how heavily those teams were relying on the information. But I think there's got to be some value. I don't know how much, but some value to we took away a potential tool that other teams use.
Yeah, and I know Elliot Friedman had reported originally that a handful of teams had like robust internal things. I think it's come out very quickly in the days since that most teams have something. So it's really disadvantaging the fans.
Yeah.
And the league is happy about this because it's also disadvantaging the agents to an extent. Puckpedia is still a great resource, so the information is still there and out there, but the contract information being public is the best advantage for the agents in the Players Association. That's why the league, kind of, as Friedman had described it, had an icy view of CapFriendly, because frankly CapFriendly was helping the player side in negotiations. So last thing on CapFriendly, I think we've received a lot of DMs, texts, maybe not a lot, but a couple DMs, a couple texts from listeners. First, we appreciate you listening. Second, so if you weren't one of those people, like, are we going to build a site? The short answer is probably not. The longer answer is potentially, but even if it did happen, I wouldn't guarantee that would be something for public consumption.
That I'll add on to it, just where we're both at. It's not something that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks to be ready when CapFriendly's gone. Where there might be some other people who actually throw something together in that amount of time. I think for us personally, the more likely goal is potentially for us to have a website that is very usable, that's around kind of what we produce as content, but not necessarily the go-to public database for contract information.
And with neither of this being our full-time jobs,
exactly.
Then like there's life as well. But as in addition to this just not being either of our full-time jobs, we're also, I have some level of coding experience, but it's not building a website. pretty good at building our shiny apps, but that's a little bit more than just than a full Cap site.
Our website experience is very much like can pass a college course, but a basic level like set up a website college course, but we aren't whipping something up in 2 weeks to get it to go live.
We do have the data. We do have, to an extent, we've downloaded lots of contract data over the years for our projections. I would say there's probably a level of contacts and connections that if it did become something that we probably could continue to stay current with information, but right now that's not on. We talked about it, and it's probably not something realistic. And we did have even a few people reach out saying, hey, if I could be of like assistance, or I know some people that could be of assistance, appreciate that. But right now our time and monetary commitment is just not, we just aren't able to do something like that. So we're not saying no long term, but don't expect AFP Analytics cap site, a max term cap site anytime soon.
We are not some business that's going to pop up replacing CapFriendly right now. It's not the right way. Is it's not at all realistic for us.
And then even again, I've referenced a couple times my actual job works with agents, tax returns for professional athletes. Even if I wanted to build something, I pitch it privately first to see what I could get to bite. So maybe we will build something and you just won't ever see it either. That's always a possibility as well.
Maybe even a greater potential that would happen. So it's unlikely you see something anytime soon. Definitely not in the near future.
So let's get into free agencies. A couple weeks away. Stanley Cup final. We're a couple games in. Not guaranteeing a Florida Panther win, but we're recording this a little bit before Game 3. We'll see how tonight goes, but seems like a good possibility this wraps up sooner than later. And even now, there's free agent and business stuff is starting to crop up because the way the NHL schedule kind of is laid out, we are 3 weeks basically away from the start of free agency. Teams are going to want to make trades. They're going to have their buyouts figured out shortly after the season ends. And like it's just it's going to be a very short time frame, so you're not going to see moves always announced on like days of games. Although today was a pretty big move day with a couple contracts signed. Yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple off days start to see some trades. Start to see something start to trickle out because it's just the reality of the situation is, especially if Edmonton gets a couple games at home and teams start to know that the final's going 6-7 games, business has to start getting done. Because the NHL drafts in just a few weeks, and Game 7 would just be potentially a couple days before the draft kind of kicks off. So things have to start happening. So I think probably the most important thing between now and July 1st, so about 3 weeks, is the idea of 8-year contracts. So I think let's start there. Let's talk about 8-year contracts, why the next couple weeks are critical for that, how an 8-year contract kind of comes about.
Yeah, so this is something that kind of came up in our X mentions, and we realized it would probably be something pretty good to talk about. So the general idea is a player can sign an 8-year contract with his current team. And then he can sign a 7-year contract with other teams. Those being the max in those situations.
The max term, if you will.
Oh, yeah, max term. Might as well throw that out there. So, where it gets a little, we'll call it confusing, because it is a little bit confusing, is if a team is looking to potentially acquire a player and then sign him to a max term, it's not so clear cut. So I believe, and go ahead and jump in if this isn't quite right, there is a team's reserve list.
Yep.
And at the trade deadline, if a player is not on X team's reserve list, that player cannot sign an 8-year contract with X team. So I think the example, or at least one of the main ones that came up, was kind of talking about Jake Gensel, because the Hurricanes are maybe willing to trade his rights to the Canucks. So
or someone
else, but this came up through, we'll call it Canucks Twitter. We love Canucks Twitter. Yeah. So an acquiring team of his rights, I think the general perception that's out there is still, okay, that team acquires his rights, they can sign him to an 8-year contract. That's not correct, because he wasn't on that team's reserve list at the deadline. So what would really need to happen, and one of the more recent examples of this was Damon Severson between the New Jersey Devils and the Columbus Blue Jackets. If an 8-year contract is what is wanted by both the acquiring team and the player, it needs to be signed with that first current team. So a team wanting to acquire Gensel would have to pretty much be granted the ability to have those contract discussions, and then the contract would need to be signed by Carolina and then have him traded to his new team.
So let me also, just for complete clarity, Gensel was on Pittsburgh as well this year, but because he was on Carolina as of the trade deadline, that's the only team that can give him that 8-year contract. So Pittsburgh can't acquire him back and give him an 8-year contract in the next couple weeks. Just can't happen. And then once the clock strikes midnight between June 30th and July 1st, 8-year contracts are off the table. So if Gensel wants to go this 8-year contract route via sign and trade, whatever, or stay in Carolina, even, that's still an option, it has to be done 11:59 p.m. June 30th. And it has to be submitted to the league office by that time. If it's not, if it's late, 8-year contract's off the table. So just kind of sticking with the logistics of it, it sounds very confusing, because in essence, any team could get Jake Gensel on an 8-year contract right now. It's the how it kind of works according to the collective bargaining agreement and the kind of the legal behind the scenes stuff that's a little bit confusing. So it's not wrong to say that any team can get Jake Gensel on an 8-year contract. James laid out perfectly exactly how the logistics work, but you're probably wondering, well, how can he talk to teams and stuff like that? So there are basically two ways that a player and his agent can talk to other teams at this time of the year. Option one is the team can acquire his signing rights. But the minute a team, so we'll stick with Vancouver as the example, acquires Gensel's signing rights, the 8-year deal is off the table. The reason the Canucks or another team would want to do something like that is because now they control who Gensel can pretty much talk with. And if they're serious about getting a deal done, they would want to say, hey, you can only negotiate with us right now. Where the water gets, we'll say, murky, but there is a level of cleanness to this, but also murky, is agents are talking to teams, or there's channels set up so an agent would know where other teams potentially stand. But it's in Carolina's best interest right now, if they are pretty sure they're not re-signing him, even if they want to re-sign him, it's in their best interest to let Gensel and his agent, who I believe is Ben Hankinson, Octagon, to talk to whoever they want, basically. Maybe the Hurricanes will say, hey, you can't talk with the Tampa Bay Lightning because we don't want you going to, or New York Rangers because we don't want you going to one of our like close competitors. Fine. But they can give basically the player side the permission to discuss what a contract, it's even set parameters for what a like sign and trade compensation as far as like draft picks or prospects might look like. So Carolina can basically let Getzel's camp and another team broker a deal. And that's in their best interest to do that because, one, it shows Getzel where the marketplace is standing for his services, basically. So they can say, hey, our offer's actually not that bad. You've seen what's out there. Our offer's not bad. Or they can get the maximum trade return. Like, a team's going to be willing to give up the most if they can basically have a contract agreed to. So until basically there's a formal agreement to either sign a contract or trade his rights, no draft pick, prospects, whatever, trade compensation is sent to Carolina. The minute something's agreed to, that's when the compensation would kick in. That's generally how it works. I think anything else we want to add?
I don't think so.
So hopefully that all makes sense if you're listening. Kind of, it's murky, but it's clear in that the team can really it's in Carolina's best interest if they are completely like, we're probably not re-signing him. It's in their best interest to let him and his agent basically talk and see where the market is for him.
Yep.
Would be the next kind of common misconception or common thing that we should touch on for free agency or the draft.
I think we should talk about when players can actually sign the contract. So just in the past conversation right now, we talked about a team that acquires someone's rights can sign that player. Other than that, a player can sign with his current team anytime. Can't sign with other teams till July 1st. So that's the opening of free agency. So any type of extension that gets done before July 1st, whether it's with their current team they just got done playing for, whether their rights were traded to another team and they sign a new deal, they can put, I think as you've alluded to, pen to paper and contracts sealed. It's a done deal. It's all about actual free agency, being able to negotiate with 5 other teams. None of those contracts can get signed until July 1st when free agency opens, which usually there is a ton that flow through very quickly on July 1st.
Yeah, because of course that means no one's been talking beforehand. At free agency opens noon, 12:01, massive contract signed. Clearly that came together in a minute. Always happens that way. So I think the kind of analogy to bring up here is in the U.S. I know we realize not everyone that's listening is based in the U.S., but NFL football is one of the biggest, probably the biggest sport. We're both big NFL football fans too. The mentality in football is nothing's done until the league year opens, so nothing's officially done. People could back out of contracts. Teams could back out of trades in theory. Nothing's executed until the league year opens. That's not how the NHL calendar works. It's basically on a rolling basis all the way up until June 30th. You're with your previous team. Once July 1st happens, you can sign with your next team. So it's a little just different mindset, but yeah, there's no waiting until July 1st to actually have an official contract. So today, Jalen Chatfield and Capo Caco both agreed to deals with their new teams. As soon as they've actually signed on the dotted line or DocuSigned the contract, as in today's day and age. Shout out DocuSign if you want to sponsor us. Not a sponsor, but if you want to, let us know. if you use that, if you put your name on the paper, contract's official, you're with the team. So assuming Chatfield and or Kako have already actually done so they're staying with their teams. There's no backing out. There's no some other team coming in for Chatfield especially and wooing him with a bigger offer. He's locked in 3 years, $3 million with Carolina. I think one other kind of football related mentality in at least US football is the idea of including bonuses in contracts. So most contracts in the NHL cannot include anything other than a signing bonus. So entry-level contracts and players who sign a 35 plus, which is they have to be 35 years old as of July 1st, and sign I believe it's a 1-year contract, they can include bonuses. There's one other loophole, we'll call it the Connor Brown, missed a lot of time with injury, but have played in the league for a while. Not loophole, but just nuance. But all of these top guys who are about to sign new contracts cannot include anything tied to basically any way to earn additional money. So you can't say, oh, I'll use Brandon Montour as an example here because he was coming off a down point season. The previous year he was at like 60, came off because of injuries and stuff, but he was like, his points were in half. You can't put a bonus in saying, oh, if he hits that 60-point mark again, he gets another $500,000. Can't put Sam Reinhart, if he scores another 50 goals again, he can't get an extra $1 million. It's you have to come to terms on what that contract's going to look like, and you're stuck with that. So realistically, there's not much wiggle room. You can't necessarily tie things to performance, team performance, stuff like that. You also, I guess this is also starting to become trade season as well. So if a player's rights were traded, the team can't put like a condition. So let's say the Canucks do, sticking with our Jake Gensel example, say the Canucks take a swing and acquire Jake Gensel's rights. If they were to, Carolina might say, hey, yeah, we'll trade him for a 5th round pick. And that pick would become a 3rd if you get a contract on. That can't happen. That cannot happen. There's a kind of a workaround. Carolina could say, well, put the condition, well, it becomes a 3rd round pick if Gensel scores 10 goals for the Canucks next year. Silly, but that's how conditions work with kind of trades. It's so silly that they just got rid of it. It makes sense at this time of the year, but just in general. So yeah, and any player that's like traded in the next couple weeks, signing rights are traded, the team can't up the draft pick if the player actually does sign. That's kind of how it works. But they can up the draft pick in theory about scoring X amount of goals the next year. Final thing is, I think, another timing related thing that we should definitely hit on. Talked about in past episodes, but we're starting to get towards the end of the Stanley Cup final. So I think it's important we bring it up again because there's still one interesting case study name out there to talk about.
Yeah, so buyouts. June 15th. Well, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. So, first buyout period that teams can use, it is the later of June 15th or 48 hours after the Stanley Cup ends is when it would open. We're recording the night of Game 3, which is June 13th. And I believe Game 4 would be June 15th. So we're at the point now where, I guess if Florida were to sweep, then it would open June 17th. But, and that would really be the earliest it could open. It could get pushed. I think the last scheduled day for a Game 7 is June 24th. I believe that's a Monday. So if Game 7 had to be played, we would be looking at June 26th. So the Wednesday right in between Cup Finals, and the draft. So that is the general timing of the buyout, or the buyout period. Were you alluding to Dubois?
Real quickly before we get into Dubois, the buyout window also has to be done before July 1st.
Yes.
So if the Stanley Cup Final were to go 7 games, a team basically has to know who they're buying out instantly and make that happen instantly.
Yes. So, and I guess to just add a little bit more to that, Florida, Edmonton, if there's someone on those teams who are currently playing in the Cup Final that a team wants to buy out, there is a GM sitting there watching the player try and win Stanley Cup for him, and knowing that in a couple weeks, at worst, they're buying out that player's contract. So it can be. It's interesting timing. Everything happens very, very fast.
Just imagine, goes 7 games, whoever wins parties for a couple days, and the player gets the call while still hungover from partying. Yeah, thanks for your service, but see ya.
Yep.
I mean, that could happen via trade too, but the buyout's just absolutely kind of it's kind of funny at this point.
It's more of a brutal thing, I think, is you're not worth your contract. That's brutal to take.
So Dubois, let's get back to Dubois. There's been talk about this, mentions of this. So I think there's a level of it. Would this even be a smart move? But there is a very interesting kind of timing aspect to this that does potentially change how the Kings might think about approaching a potential PL Dubois buyout.
Yeah. Okay. So something that's specific to, really, it's specific to an age 26 player.
25 going on to 26.
Yes. So when the issue here with Dubois is when he turns 26. So he turns 26 on June 24th, I believe. So that last scheduled Cup day. And here's where that gets funky with the buyout rule. So if a player is younger than 26 at the time of the buyout is 1/3 of the remaining contract value. If he is already 26, so if he's 26 or older, the buyout is 2/3 of the remaining contract value. Pretty significant difference. If, let's say, Panthers sweep, so I think I had it right before. So it would be they sweep on the 15th of June. Buyout window opens on the 17th. Dubois is 25. They could do 1/3 of the remaining contract. So they could buy out for 1/3. If it goes 7 games, it ends, or the cup ends on the 24th. Dubois just turned 26. Buyout window doesn't open until the 26th, where he is already, again, 26 years old. That would be a 2/3 buyout. Now, this could be completely irrelevant. Dubois might not be getting bought out. It's been put out there by their GM, Rob Blake, that it's not something they're looking to do. But that could also just be what was put out there at the end of the season for the Kings.
Potentially because
Things
he wants to trade him, trying to keep a trade open.
If you announce right away that you're going to buy out a player, you killed any potential value in moving him. So that just because it was said a few weeks ago does not mean that's the case now. So yeah, that date, the 24th, being Dubois' birthday, buying him out is way more likely before that day than if it has to happen after that day.
Yeah, and that's the other reason that the sentiment was potentially put out by Rob Blake is you don't want to hurt the player's feelings saying, yeah, we don't want you if we can get you bought out at 1/3 of the cost, but we're fine keeping you at 2/3 of the cost. So yeah, timing could be absolutely everything. So At this point, if Rob Blake wants to buy out Dubois' contract, he is the biggest Florida Panther fan on the planet. Because he needs them to win in like 5 games, 4 or 5 games. Otherwise, we're starting to, I don't know all the dates of the Cup final. You'll look them up and fact check me. But I would imagine Game 6 is going to be very close to this potential window as well.
So Game 6 would be on the 21st. The buyout window would open on the 23rd, a day before Dubois turns 26. So if you are a fan of drama, suspense, you are looking at a Game 6 final. That's where it gets decided, and it comes right down to the wire with Dubois. And maybe he gets bought out, maybe he doesn't.
Believe he would have to be put on the waivers the day before. I believe they can put him on waivers the day before. I probably should have fact-checked myself a little bit. So I think the buyout window would open the 23rd. I believe Dubois could go on waivers the 22nd for purposes of that buyout the next day. I believe that's how it would work. I'm pretty confident he would have to go on waivers first.
He does have to go on waivers. I'm unsure
what that timing looks like. So even 6 games, I think I'm correct that once the buyout window is basically set to open, that you can put a player on in the 24 hours leading up to that to have them clear waivers for the purpose of the buyout when it opens. But I could be wrong there, so there is a chance that even going 6, even if it gets to 6 games, that could be too long as well. If they need an extra, so if the buyout window has to open, then they need 24 hours to be able to buy out after the window opens. That then puts us on Dubois' birthday. So he would be 26 years old at that point. Super, super interesting, super complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it happens.
I don't either.
But it's that doesn't even really happen every year where there's a player potentially or just being mentioned every once in a while as a candidate to be bought out, and then you have a situation like this. That's very unique. So, interesting thing to bring up and kind of talk about.
I would imagine that even again, I agree with you. I don't expect it to happen. The 1/3 is a little bit intriguing, but I think there's enough of a good player there. Like, he's on an okay enough contract, especially in a couple of years with the cap going up. It's probably not going to be great, but it'll probably be okay. But I do wonder if the league and the Players Association make a tweak to this next time they collectively bargain, because this is a scenario that's come up, but there are obviously other players who are born in the end towards the end of June who turn 25 to 26. It's just they're not the ones bought out. But just because Dubois is going to be potentially the first one we talk about, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen the next 3 years as well, potentially, where the end of the Cup final could impact whether a team could buy out a player. So I would expect somehow they come up with some level of tweak where maybe as long as I don't know exactly what that looks like, but some tweak to basically make this a little bit more fair and not just base it arbitrarily on when a player's birthday is.
Yeah, I could definitely see a change. I would wonder the PA might kind of be looking for something in return to make a change to the rule. I don't know.
Potentially, but like it's such an arbitrary deadline that maybe they might just be okay with a level of clarity as well. Maybe you have to do it before, like.
Maybe, but well, at the same time, it could also make it more likely players get bought out, which they would not favor.
Yeah. So. I don't know. That would be an interesting one to kind of sit in on those negotiations, but I just can't imagine they leave it where each year, depending on when the Stanley Cup final ends, could. I don't know. I mean, it's always been a thing, but that there's now an example maybe brings it to mind as like maybe this isn't the best idea. I'm not gonna sit here and say I have a good solution, but I think that maybe it's something that should be addressed and talked about, because it is also a fairness principle amongst like teams and players. Just based on when a player's birthday is, could impact when they get bought out, which is just not necessarily fair to either the team or the player.
I definitely agree. Just in general, I think it even hints at just the way the schedule is at the end of June, beginning of July, is not great. I don't think teams love that. The draft is going to end and there's going to be a day in between free agency. That's insane. And there's teams that are going to be staying in Vegas, which is probably not ideal, but it makes more sense than leaving.
Sounds like we're going to have some fun contracts handed out July 1st if teams are still in Vegas, you know. Whatever, still in the gambling mindset, cool. Maybe still not there mentally. But yeah, or some teams aren't going to send their entire delegation to travel, like one of the two. Like, yeah. The schedule this year, I mean, I'm all for giving players more time to rest and let them recover and have better long-term health implications. But it also is just, it's not ideal. Like, it's not ideal for the players either, because they're just going to kind of have a, like, there's going to be some limbo for players looking to sign as well. So I don't know if there's anything else we necessarily wanted to cover. That was kind of the, I think we hit on a lot of the topics we were looking to set out for this episode.
I would say I think we're good. Eventually you might hear us either re-record or just repost / get this out there, the arbitration topic. That's still a little bit of a ways away to really be
I guess, well, real quickly,
maybe base
level, because this is important. So I believe this has to happen before July 1st. I could be, it's right around that time. Like the last week in June, first week in July is when arbitration elections have to be made. So a team can elect for arbitration, I believe, before the opening of free agency, which would eliminate. So once either the player or the team elects for arbitration, offer sheets are done for that player. So teams, I believe, are able to elect for arbitration before July 1st to basically get rid of the threat of any offer sheet. So there might be a couple instances. Vancouver with Hronek might be maybe the most prominent, potentially, if they're afraid of an offer sheet.
So similar to the buyout team, so club elected salary arbitration is June 15th or 48 hours after the Stanley Cup final. Player is a little bit different, I believe. Player must notify Central Registry, NHLPA, and the team by 5 p.m. Eastern on July 5th.
So 48 hours after the cup window for teams, and I believe that might close on July at the end of the league year, for teams to file for arbitration. So I think the buyout window and the team elected arbitration windows are very similar. So team elected arbitration, that means the team would like to retain the player's rights and take him to arbitration where he can get a award, and we have a previous episode last summer. I think we'll re-record something to freshen it up with kind of some current names this summer as well. And then for the basically 5 days after after July 1st, players can elect for arbitration. So if an offer sheet's going to be given for an arbitration eligible player, first the team would have not get elected for arbitration. But second, that has to happen in basically the first 4 days of free agency for an arbitration eligible player. So if you're rooting for an offer sheet for, again, I'll use Philip Hronek because I think Martin Necas is the other big name to talk about here. Those guys are both arbitration eligible. If you're looking to see an offer sheet for them, have your team basically deliver an offer sheet. First, you have to make sure the team doesn't elect for arbitration. Second, you would need to get that offer sheet basically in before July 5th because players almost always elect for arbitration if they're eligible because they can get more salary. I guess maybe if there was an offer sheet in the works, they might give a little more time and not elect because they know they're signing that. For the most part, I guess arbitration, that's the other kind of key important date to start to look at. So team elected arbitration is probably the one to monitor if the cup final were to end shortly. I think with that, we have got through a lot of the important stuff. So appreciate you listening. Subscribe to Max Stern Podcast, available on all major podcast platforms, at AFP Analytics on X. And I probably should have plugged this earlier. We do also have a business glossary, so if you do have some like business related questions, AFPanalytics.com does have a business related glossary. I'm gonna hope to continue to build that out, but life and actual work has gotten in the way of being able to revisit that, so that's something that I want to add to. But a lot of the things we did kind of go over are already up on AFPanalytics.com as kind of a reference. So as CapFriendly goes dark, AFPanalytics.com can answer some of your questions. We don't have contract data and stuff. We do have some like CBA questions. There are, I think, because I wrote it, some good resources there. So appreciate you listening, subscribing, and with that, we'll talk to you next time.